Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Okay, beginning our afternoon session, as we usually encouraging, if you've been here through the morning, you've already put in some effort. And now, usually, the morning tends to be the really effortful time. Afternoon, we've maybe had lunch, or maybe we've just been meditating a couple hours already. It tends to be more of a time of abiding in the processes that we've gotten started, seeing what arises. We don't want to strain ourselves. Yeah, there can still be a lot of insight in that, and the sort of, well, what happens when we've got the ball rolling? Where does it go? And we've been thinking about intention, and now maybe allow thoughts of intention to arise. So another way of doing the same thing is like we set the stage, and then we see what arrives on it. Yeah. So we get ourselves in a meditative space and we relax, we maybe follow the breath, and then we'll just drop in a thought. You're like, what sort of intentions do I have going here? What is my intention? What am I cultivating? Yeah. What do I keep thinking about? What do I want to have happen during the retreat, after the retreat, tomorrow, the next day? What do I want to have happen in relation to the other people around me, to the other animals around me, to just whatever is going on? Yeah. And we see that this is where getting too microscopic, trying to really analyze our mind states will cause us to miss a greater part of what intention is doing. And people talking about what they're experiencing in meditation, and people talking about they're going to be moving soon. Yeah, people talking about they're going to go visit a monastery soon, and all of those involve intentions. People deciding what meditation technique to use is setting an intention. Yeah, that intention, it doesn't actually produce the action until the next time they're on the cushion. But that doesn't mean it wasn't intention. Yeah. So often we find ourselves doing things. And if at the time that we're doing something, we're kind of like, well, what was my intention here? It might have been quite a while back that we set the intention that eventually got us here. So we are starting to look at this idea of intention as in a different way than we've maybe been taught, or that we've grown up thinking about it, which is that we're setting an intention as we do the thing. Yeah. The reality is when something's being done, often we're reacting to it. And that is our intention. We're setting an intention to like, how do I feel about this thing that I'm doing and the results of it? Yeah. And that will color the next time we might try and do it. Yeah, if we get really bad results and we reflect on it when we do a particular action, then we're usually setting an intention to not do it that way in the future. Whereas if we do something we get really good results, often we're kind of reflecting on that and we're processing it, and we're like, can I can I make that happen again? And sometimes it's kind of tricky because sometimes it was just the meeting of fortuitous variables. Yeah. Sometimes the other person was in a good mood. We were in a good mood. We had had a really good breakfast. Things were just perfect. And we had this really nice interaction. And we might not be able to replicate it so easily, but we're still setting the intention. We're like, that went well. That was pleasant. Having a good interaction with that person is way preferable. I think I should try to do that instead of being really mean to them and just trying to get them out of the room quicker. Maybe I should be nice to them, and maybe we'll still part ways and I'll still get rid of them quicker, but on good terms rather than bad terms. Yeah. And so, yeah, it's less about the moment to moment as it is to the patterns and the direction of mind that we're setting up. Because again, Yeah, whereas we think that this consciousness and this body and its feelings and perceptions and cravings are the whole scenario, if we were to zoom back out to the place where ignorance and views and mental formations are arising, we would realize that this consciousness is arising in something. This consciousness is arising in minds, and we've taken it to be everything. We've taken it to be all of reality, but it's just this story that's happening within the mind, and the mind is ultimately unaffected by it. We are the ones suffering. The deepest levels of the mind are just kind of processing it, and it's like, should we get involved? And sometimes it's like, yeah, let's get involved. This is not how I want the story to go. But in our better moments, it's saying, well, this is okay, this is what's happening. Let's just this is what's going on. It'll be, you know, I want this story to have a good ending. So let's alter the dialogue a little so the character's not such a jerk and people are actually friendly to them. Yeah, and work things out that way. So we kind of the mind goes through these cycles, consciousness goes through these cycles, and the intentions that are directing the flow of our life are sort of like ocean currents. Yeah, they're much bigger, so we don't have to use a microscope to see them. You know, but it's also it doesn't mean we can't work on them just because many of the intentions and the patterns of our mind are broad reaching and have maybe been going on for quite a while. It doesn't mean we can't get better at the way we deal with intention. And I think that that can also be part of the afternoon, but also going forward is there is actual skills that we can develop with intention that apply whether or not our intentions are wholesome or unwholesome. And this is one of the strengths of Theravada Buddhism. It's not simply aspirational. It's not like, may I just have wholesome mind states as though that will cause them to happen. But it's very realistic. We're like, okay, I have good mind states and bad mind states, but I still got to get the work done. How am I going to do it? Well, we can get more skillful even in our unwholesome states. And often that gives us more room to start cultivating the wholesome ones. And this in Buddhism is called the four right efforts. First, we really work on managing the unwholesome states that keep coming up, the bad intentions that we know are operating in our life, the ones that deal with greed, hatred, and delusion. And then we kind of work to maintain those, to compartmentalize them, to shrink them however we can. We want them running the show less. It's only then when we've got some breathing room that we start to be like, well, what are some good intentions I can have? Intentions of generosity, intentions of kindness, intentions of compassion and sensitivity and empathy. Then we start to bring those in. And once those are arising, and so I was talking with somebody, it's like, so it can sometimes be amazing. And we sometimes catch ourselves after the fact and we're like, I was just really nice there. Why? And trying to process it is like, it feels so out of control. Shouldn't I have been more intentional about doing all that kind stuff so that I can really get benefits out of? But that's the funny thing about it. Our idea of control is often an unwholesome aspect of our mind, where when we're doing something good, it often feels like we're out of control. It often feels like we're not closely holding on to things, but we're letting things go in a particular direction because we know it's okay. And so it might only be after the fact that we check in and we're like, no, I totally don't regret any part of that. That was good. That was wholesome. I guess I should do it that way next time. And if we find ourselves in these long runs of, wholesome, activities and wholesome speech and wholesome mind states towards other beings, keep doing that. Whether or not there's a feeling of control, just keep keep going with it. Because ultimately, the idea of control should be allowed to drop away. And this is where we see this cycle of the minds, you know, consciousness, consciousness, perception, feeling, craving, is happening within the mind as a whole when we're not setting any more intentions because the things that we're experiencing are not a problem. They're not leading to further suffering. Well, then it just sort of runs itself. And when we don't need to get involved, then we have stopped doing karma, right? Intention leads to karma, and we know that the generation of karma keeps the whole thing spinning. Yeah, so if we do find that our intention to interfere, to control, to get involved, to do greed, hatred, and delusion is falling away, by definition, karma is going to be falling away. The speech that comes up will be wholesome speech. The activity that comes up will be wholesome activity, but gradually there will be more and more going with the flow, you know, seeing it as a story playing out, but it's a good story with a happy ending. So we don't need to get involved. You know, we don't need to change anything. We don't need to rewire anything. We don't need to control anything. And this is where we get into that third kind of right intention, which is that which leads to the end of intention, that which leads to the end of all of the karma, all of the activity. Yeah. So again, it can be nice to bring up a sutta. So one that I found that also deals with this topic of intention actually has a bit of a funny moment in that this is Majjhima Nikaya number 78. And in this, we have a layperson. I think their name is Panchakanga. And Panchakanga is a disciple of the Buddha. But, you know, the monks are in retreat or something. So one day he decides to go visit some other mendicants, some other practitioners of a different philosophy. And, you know, just seeing what happens. Now, that probably wasn't the most skillful of intentions, but even the Buddha was known to visit the wanderers of other philosophies from time to time, so just to see what they're talking about. And when he goes there, he's presented with something that he's not quite sure how to relate to. Namely, they talk about how to define an arahant, an enlightened being. And they say when somebody has four qualities, they are described as an invincible ascetic, an enlightened being, that they are accomplished in the skillful, excelling in the skillful, attained to the highest of attainments. What for? It's when they do no bad deeds with their body, when they speak no bad words, when they think no bad thoughts, and when they don't earn their living by a bad livelihood. And this is the measure of an enlightened being. And Panchakanga is kind of like, well, I mean, that sounds kind of like what the Buddha said, right? That sounds kind of like the Eightfold Path. Maybe I should go ask the Buddha about this. And so he gets up and he goes and sees the Buddha later on, and he relays the conversation as had. And right from the get-go, as you can see, there's no really dialogue. The Buddha just, you can imagine he kind of does that Indian head bob thing. He's like, well, Panchakanga, if what that ascetic says is true, then a little baby boy is an invincible ascetic, accomplished in the skillful, excelling in the skillful, attained to the highest attainment. For a little baby doesn't even have the concept of a body, so how could they possibly do a bad deed with their body aside from just wriggling around? A little baby doesn't even have the concept of speech, so how could they speak bad words aside from just crying? And a little baby doesn't even have the concept of thought, so how could they possibly think bad thoughts aside from just whimpering? Little baby doesn't have the concept of livelihood, so how could they possibly earn a living by bad livelihood aside from their mother's breast? If what that ascetic says is true, a little baby boy would be an invincible ascetic. And so right there, the Buddha is saying, you don't measure an enlightened being by what they do. And this is where we've talked about in the past that the world often looks immediately at the action to decide if something is skillful or unskillful. Yeah. And when the actions are good, probably the being is good. But even in terms of like mundane right intention, that is, intention of renunciation, intention of love and kindness, intention of compassion, there can still be a sense of self. And that sense of self is still leading, is still laying the foundation for future acts of greed, hatred, and delusion, which might arise in the future. Yeah. They haven't completely done away with the root cause. And so, how could you possibly say that that person is completely accomplished and attained to the highest attainment? They still have more they could do in removing that base entirely. And it is through understanding our thoughts and our minds and our intention that you erode that base by which all of the unskillful actions and unskillful speech and unskillful livelihood could occur. So skip ahead because the Buddha talks about each of these in turn, that being skillful behaviors, unskillful behaviors, livelihood, and such. But he does talk about sankappa, or intention or thought, which is what we are interested in today. And so the Buddha says, and what are unskillful thoughts? Thoughts of sensuality, of malice, of cruelty. These are unskillful thoughts. Where do these unskillful thoughts stem from? Where they stem from, I've stated earlier. But you could say that they stem from perception. What perception? Well, perception takes many and diverse forms, but namely perceptions of sensuality, malice, and cruelty. Unskillful thoughts stem from this. And where do unskillful thoughts cease without anything left over? Their cessation, I've also stated, it's when a mendicant, quite secluded from sensual pleasures, secluded from unskillful qualities, enters and remains in the first jhana, which has rapture and bliss born from seclusion from the five senses, while placing the mind and keeping it connected. This is where unskillful thoughts cease without anything left over. And this is an important, to basically, to paraphrase, the Buddha is saying, all of our unwholesome intentions have perception as their source. Well, isn't that interesting? It isn't a strange kind of loop that perception's in the middle. You have consciousness leads to the sense bases, leads to perception. So how is it that that could be what our intention comes from if the volitional formations were acting on the consciousness before it even arose? But this is what the Buddha is saying, is why samsara is usually presented as a loop, is these things condition each other. And it's the way that we perceive the world and the way that we develop our perceptions influences how we think. And how we think, by turn, kind of points us in the direction of how we're going to continue to think. Because if we have a volitional formation of cruelty, for instance, an intention of cruelty that is operating when consciousness arises, well, guess what kind of perception we're going to have? And it's the chicken and the egg, and we can't really tell which comes first. All that we know is one is feeding the next, is feeding the next, is feeding the next. Yeah? But where do all of the unwholesome tendencies subside? Well, in unwholesome intention ends at the entry to the first jhana. And this is because in the breaking of that continuity of consciousness and the sort of cycles of this one life, which happens at the entry to the first jhana, we have only wholesome vitaka vichara, only wholesome attention and application of mind takes place, because there's no longer the hindrances, there's no longer unskillful habits arising, there are only skillful habits arising. Yeah. So at this point, there's no way that we could be cultivating perceptions of sensual desire. Certainly not. That's a hindrance that's subsided. Or ill will, that's a hindrance that has subsided. Or even cruelty. Usually we're not forming any bodily kama. So how could we be cruel to people? We're not able to form those kind of intentions when we have secluded the mind from sensuality, when we've secluded it from the hindrances. Very interestingly, the Buddha goes on to talk about even our skillful intentions can cease. And this is something that we can attend to, and remembering that the noblest of intentions are going to be those that don't even arise, yeah? When our intention is to just let go, to not form kama, to not get involved, yeah? And this is where the Eightfold Path is the foundation, is this supporting fabric, is the basis, on which everything arises. Yeah? Yeah. When we have the Eightfold Path, it becomes a lot easier to do any one part of the Eightfold Path, like right thoughts, right speech, and right action, right livelihood. Yeah. So the Buddha says, what are skillful thoughts? They are thoughts of renunciation, goodwill, and harmlessness. These are skillful thoughts. And where do they stem from? It has been stated they stem from perception. What perception? Well, perception takes many and diverse forms, but perceptions of renunciation, goodwill, and harmlessness. Skillful thoughts stem from this. And where do these skillful thoughts cease without anything left over? It's when, as the placing of the mind and keeping it connected and stilled, a mendicant enters and remains in the second jhana, which has the rapture and bliss born of immersion, with internal clarity and mind at one, without placing the mind and keeping it connected, without vitakka and vichara. This is where these skillful thoughts cease without anything left over. So a lot of our perception is built up around the verbal formation, around our development of perceptions or perspectives or opinions on things. And in the entry of the second jhana, we realize we don't need to make these. Yeah, the second jhana is sometimes called the great stillness or the great silence, because the verbal formation, which kind of required vitakka and vichara, the application of mind, will go quiet. It will fall away. And without the generation of perception, there can't be the generation of intention. And so we're not able to generate new intentions at this point. What's just going to occur is just the following out of whatever momentum of mind is already taking place, whether it be to deepen samadhi or whether it be to stay a time and then to come back out. But we have a body, and the body eventually is going to need to eat. We're not going to always be in the second jhana. We're going to eventually come back out. And these processes are going to start back up if we're not careful. But one of the real strengths of samadhi is that we can get an experience of what it's like to not do these things. And getting that experience allows us to see for ourselves the freedom, the very real freedom that's possible. What would it be like if we weren't forming intentions? Yeah? But we do this all the time. We have all sorts of things happen in life, and we just let them happen. Yeah, we don't really react to them. We're like, okay, yeah, that was a thing. And that's in contrast to where something happens and we're like, man, I just can't let that happen again. I got to do something about this. That wasn't right. This wasn't respectful. That wasn't appreciated. This isn't practical. This isn't. And we set this really strong intention to like stop it. But often, how vague are our intentions? And how likely are they to have a clear goal, to have a clear end point? And so I thought maybe in the afternoon, we can even seed the mind with this idea of how could we get more skillful with the intentions that we do set? Supposing that we haven't quite grasped or mastered the ability to not make karma yet, because we've still got a lot of stuff going on in our body, speech, and mind that we're kind of not okay with, and the suffering is still arising. How can we nevertheless set intentions that won't constrict us, that won't cause us problems in the future, and especially problems in the future where we don't remember the intensity and the type of intention that we set? So how would we go about this? Well, first off, we can recognize that there's a question of scale, right? Now we have simple intentions like I'm going to pick up this pen, and I'm going to click the pen, and I'm going to write something. Yeah. And these are example of intentions that have no weight at all. Yeah. Either we pick up the pen or we don't pick up the pen. Either we write something or we don't write something. And if we put it back down, often we immediately forget that we had the intention, so we just didn't do it. And when you wake up in the morning, probably you see these kinds of intentions are firing like mad. Oh, I should really go for a jog today. Oh, I should eat more vegetables. Oh, I should do this, I should do that, I should do that. And as soon as you start to actually do stuff, none of it is the stuff that you intended to do first thing in the morning. You kind of blow right by all of those objectives, and you can, well, yeah, tomorrow's another day. It would have been a good idea to have this really nutritious green smoothie, but I didn't get around to it. Yeah, it's just so much work. That's where we realize the simplest intentions are, if we check in with them, do we even need to set them? Yeah. Do we need to decide what we're going to have for breakfast 10 minutes before we get to the kitchen? Yeah. Or can we just figure it out once we get there, once we're presented with the stuff? Yeah. Do we need to think, oh, I'm gonna get that pen, or can, when it's time to write, we just reach over and pick up the pen? Or you think we're sitting there in meditation, and we see the sunbeam. This is because I'm looking at the sunbeam kind of traces itself across the floor, and we're thinking during half of the meditation, like, as soon as the half hour is up, I'm going to get up and I'm going to close the blind so that that sunbeam doesn't end up in my face and I get sunburned on one half of my nose. And that's an intention. And here it has a bit more weight, right? Because it wasn't just a one-off. It wasn't just a quick thought, but we were cultivating it. Like, don't forget, or you're going to get sunburned, and you're going to be in the middle of meditation, and you're going to have the sun just peeling away the layers of your flesh, and you're going to regret it. So remember, put down the blind, put down the blind, put down the blind. We're trying to create a formation, right? Something that will act on us in the future, a sankhara. This is, yeah, again, do we need to? But also, it's not the worst because it has a clear goal, right? The real danger in these is that we don't do them. And we set such a strong intention, and then we end up forgetting anyway. Well, then all of that energy has gone into a sankhara that we're going to be really kicking ourselves, if we sit back down and we didn't do it. And then we're going to spend the whole meditation like, why didn't I set all of that strong intention, but it didn't. And we're going to set an intention to set even stronger intentions in the future. You see, it's a vicious cycle, right? But many things during life, rather than intending about something that's right in front of us, we set an intention about something that's a little bit in the future. That requires some steps, that requires a bit of intermediary actions to take place. And this is where we can get better at this. Namely, we want to look that, is it something that we can do, or is it something that really requires other factors, right? If we set an intention like, I'm going to be popular, well, that's really dependent on a lot of factors, right? And not all of them are up to you. Yeah, if we set an intention like, I'm going to have a really healthy meal, well, then we get to the fridge and we realize we haven't gone shopping yet, and there's none of the leftovers in there. It's not looking good. But there were other factors involved. Our intention didn't match what we were capable of. But also, how many intermediate steps are there between us and the goal that we're setting out? Is it a really concrete goal, in which case we can't really fulfill that intention until we do X, Y, and Z? Or is it a really vague goal, like, yeah, I should do something about it so I'm not sitting in the sun? Well, that's a lot easier than just putting a blind eye. You can move your cushion, or you can sit at the kitchen table instead of in the study. There's a lot of ways you can not sit in direct sunlight. There's an almost infinite number of ways you can not sit in direct sunlight. Yeah. So you don't need to be so specific always with your intentions. Likewise, you might think, I should go to the store and set an intention. It's like, I should go shopping. Yeah. But rather than thinking, I should go to Trader Joe's and I should, get this, this, and this, you're just saying, I should get groceries. Yeah. And that sounds counterintuitive to our, like, but when I go to the store without a clear plan, I buy a lot of junk. Uh, but if we think about it from the perspective of intention, if we're setting an intention that is very easy and straightforward to fulfill, it's much more likely it's going to resolve. And if it resolves, then we get to that point beyond the intention. Yeah. And we've had so many of these experiences in our lifetime. We could just think back. We don't even need to contrive something, right? Where we intended to do something and then we did it. Yeah. And this could be something, it's an easy one, like sweeping the floor. And we keep thinking like, I should really sweep the floor. And every time we're sitting in meditation, we see all those little dust bunnies and we're like, I should really sweep the floor. And then finally we sweep the floor. And what is that feeling after the floor is swept? Now that's what we're talking about right here. What is it when an intention ceases? Because, and this is one way that the Venerable Ananda related to the Eightfold Path. For him, somebody with a lot of desire, the only way he could keep practicing was to have a desire for the Dhamma. And he's like, so I'm cultivating Dhamma raga, this intense passion for the Dhamma. And people would be like, isn't that a bit of hypocritical? Like, you're developing desire for the end of desire. How does that work? And he's like, no, it works like this. Imagine you're going to the park. Yeah, you want to go to, it's a hot day, you want to go to the cool park. So you set the intention, I'm going to go to the park. Based on that intention, you get the cart and you get the family and you get all dressed up and you get in the cart and you go down the road and you arrive at the park. Now, what happens to that intention once you're at the park? And the person he's asking would say, well, the intention would disappear. The desire would disappear because I'm already at the park. Why would I keep having the desire to go to the park if I'm already there? And Ananda says, exactly. Developing a desire for the end of desire. And once I get to the end of desire, that desire will no longer be applicable and it'll fall away. It sounds a little goofy, but Ananda was that kind of lovable goofy. And it worked out in the end for him. And it could work out for us too, because we want to look for, what is freedom really like? What is it really like at the end of an intention? And I think many of us, if we get poking there this afternoon, we might start to realize we're uncomfortable. We get to enjoy it for maybe 2 or 3 milliseconds. And then we immediately feel the need to set the next intention. What would it be like to not be doing something I don't want to find out? So I'm going to set another intention. Okay, I did that. Now I'm going to do this. Yeah. But instead, one way we can get skillful with our intentions, beyond just setting clear, straightforward ones that don't have a lot of caveats or steps that we need to take. Like, I'm going to sweep the floor, and we sweep the floor. It's like, okay, I'm going to take out the trash, and we take out the trash. That's very skillful. These could be motivated by desire or not by desire, but we're going to get to the end of them very quickly. And there's not going to be any obstacles in the way that will drag the intention out. But also, once we do accomplish them, abide for a bit in that space before we set another intention. Yeah. And even ask, well, did that solve the problem? And we go back and sit in our cushion and we no longer see any dust bunnies. And we're like, I guess the room is clean. We don't need to like, well, there's still dust on the windowsill there. I need to get out the duster. We don't have to take that step. Yeah. We can just kind of like, this is what it feels like to have accomplished what I set out to do. Now, this is on a very small scale. This is what it's like to be done. Yeah, that wonderful, I'm finished sweeping the floor. But it's a taste of this greater freedom that we're kind of trying to work towards, which is what would it be like to be completely done? The end of all sweeping floors, yeah, to be done with karma, to be done with samsara and intention and all of this suffering, yeah, because again, all of this suffering is really just a story, a cyclical story that's playing out in the mind. And the mind allows it to keep going because ultimately it can't be harmed by it. The mind has no form, it has no function. The only things that can suffer are the objects arising in the mind. And so we don't need to compound our suffering. Maybe when we reach the end of one of these intentions, we just kind of let it roll. And the final way that we can get really skillful is whenever we encounter an intention that we recognize is almost impossible to fulfill, we don't set intentions like that. Yeah. And when we do encounter them, try to resolve them. Yeah. Like say, so we're in an argument with somebody that we're living with, and we find ourselves thinking, I really got to get away from this person. This person is toxic. They don't understand me. They don't appreciate me. I'm going to leave. Yeah. And I say it flippantly because we all do it. Yeah. The thing is, we don't act on it. For the most part, we don't act on it. But we sometimes these thoughts come in. It's like, I should just leave. I should just pack my stuff and just go. Yeah. This is an intention that we might find start to percolate in the mind. It's like, I should get away from this person. This person is toxic. I should do something about it. I should compartmentalize. I should free myself from this person. And it's almost impossible to do because one, it kind of involves the other person too, but it involves changing our livelihood, changing our living situation, changing our job, unless it's a matter of life and death, we're probably not going to do it. So then in effect, what we're doing is we're creating tension, or we're creating a strain in the mind. We're building up energy to do something that we'll never actually do. And this is not only is it unproductive, but it is productive of suffering. Yeah. We're never going to get the goal that this intention is setting out until we die, in which case we get free of that person. Woohoo. But during our lifetime, we're not going to succeed. Yeah. And so we're going to have this long, drawn out sense of tension and disturbance in the body and the mind, built up of an intention that couldn't be satisfied. So if we do encounter something like this, like I can't stand this, I can't stand this, or even I'll be so happy when I move to another place, a place that doesn't have these barking dogs next door. I just can't wait. Oh, it'll be so wonderful. And I mean, wherever you move, there's going to be a barking dog somewhere. It might not be the house next door, but it'll be 3 doors down. So you might be setting an intention and an aspiration that you'll never get to. And so your idea of happiness is just perpetually put off into the future. And if you do it in this aspect, you'll probably do it in other aspects of your life. And that's just how to live an unfulfilled life. Yeah. So it's much easier when we encounter those to try to, any way that we can look at them in a new way and realize we don't need to set an intention there at all. Yeah. And be like, this person is really hard to be around. Yeah. And maybe we can be like, yeah, this person is really hard to be around. Just have some compassion for ourselves. Like, yeah, is it amazing that that doesn't take intention? This is what the Eightfold Path kind of looks like. This is cultivating khanti, our patience, yeah? Like having some compassion for ourselves and saying, it's like, yeah, I recognize it's not always pleasant being around that person. Probably right after we have that thought, we'll be like, oh, it's not always unpleasant either. And when we've kind of used a bit of the tension that was propping up from trying to figure out how to get away from the situation. We realized maybe there's parts of it that we don't even need to get away from. There's parts of it that are just kind of, it's okay, it's manageable, I can deal with it. And even if we start to realize the ways that we can deal with it and be with it and still be friendly and not beat, it'll probably to some degree get better, because most conflicts take two, don't they? And this is the great thing about not setting an intention, because it leaves room for us to just respond skillfully to a situation as it arises. We haven't front loaded our mind with all of this, I'm going to do this when this happens. And so when something happens, we're not saying, I know this is going to happen and this is how I'm going to react. I've already figured it out. But we can say, okay, what's going on? Oh, yeah. It's like, I just respond calmly to this. Just like, this is a little triggering, but I'm just going to breathe. And okay, what's the most skillful thing I can do in this situation? None of that takes intention. And this is where we get to a place where even our unskillful thoughts, like we recognize this is unpleasant, and we're trying to shelter ourselves from it. But we realize as we start to pull it apart, we're like, well, I can break this into manageable bits. This person's really getting on my nerves. I can just leave the room for a few minutes until I'm calmed down, and then I can come back. I don't need to set this multi-year plan to move out and never see them again and change my zip code and get a restraining order and all of that. I can just leave the room for a few minutes. And that's a much simpler, smaller scale, easily attainable, personally attainable kind of aspiration to set. Yeah. And once we do it, we get that feeling of, oh, okay, I've left the room. I accomplished what I set out to do. I don't need to set any other intentions right now. Just let's abide in this moment of breathing easy and appreciating that right now I'm away from the thing that I found was unpleasant. And more as we get skillful at doing this, it'll start to turn around. We'll have a lot more space in our life for the wholesome intentions. And when our life is got a lot of the wholesome intentions going on, there'll be more and more room for, okay, no, things are going great. I'm just going to be mindful. And that's when no intentions need to be set. Yeah. And this is where we get the real cessation, the real nibbana, the real coolness that we are searching for, which is to not have the sankharas, to not have the front-loaded intention, the mangling of perceptions, the feeling intensely about every little thing that's happening, but the state of calm, of going with the flow, of being okay with things, of things going in a positive direction, of faith and wisdom and energy and mindfulness and concentration and all these good things. Once they're there, there's no need to change anything. That's what we were going for all along. Yeah, no intention necessary. So now, yeah, the time looks good. We can do some sitting and walking in about an hour and a half, I reckon. Whether you have sat or walked or done a mixture of the both, we'll get back together and we'll have a bit of time for discussion if you like.